والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله. قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. آمنا به. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Elders, brothers and sisters, scholars, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq to enter the month of Ramadan with ma'rifah, with understanding. And we thank Him for giving us the opportunity once again to discuss essential topics, essential strategies of how we can utilize and seek maximum benefit in the holy month of Ramadan, before we enter the holy month of Ramadan. Last week we discussed a few important discussions, a few important topics, and we raised the importance of fasting. And I want to elaborate on that more this week as well, the concept of fasting. And of course, before I begin that entire discussion, and there's a few points that I wish to make for tonight's presentation, but before going into all of that, a kind reminder to all of us, the importance of how this Ramadan or this year's Ramadan is going to be very, very much different compared to all of the other months that have come before us, or the years that have come before us. It's going to be very different, naturally. It's going to be unique. It's not that Ramadan is cancelled, it's just that it's going to be different. It's going to be more challenging for some of us, or it's going to be more easier for some of us. And how we take maximum opportunity from this, how we can utilize maximum benefit from all of this, is how we strategize ourselves, how we develop the different strategies before entering the month of Ramadan, how we shape our mental state before entering the month of Ramadan. Usually every year we tend to have different discussions, and one of the most interesting discussion and frequent discussion is the long hours that we tend to fast every year. And some people complain, some people, for example, have no issues with it whatsoever. And some people try to find loopholes, looking into the different, for example, fatwa of different maraja, seeing which one is more lenient, which one is more strict, and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting time to see how people behave when things get a bit tough. But what's interesting is that usually what happens is in the early days of Ramadan, it's very, very difficult. The transition from having to eat as many meals as you want from one day to not eating at all during the daytime, 19, 20 hours during the day, is a big transition, and it has an effect on all of us. But then after a while, we get used to it. And when we get used to it, you see that it becomes easier for us. And it becomes natural, it becomes second nature to us. It's because we have managed, or our bodies have managed to adapt to it very, very quickly. And that's one of the beauties of the human body, the biology of the human being, how it can adapt to circumstances very quickly and very effectively. And so we tend to adapt to it very quickly, very effectively, to the extent that towards the end of the month of Ramadan, we all feel better. Those who have actively engaged in the act of fasting, those who have engaged in siyam every day during the holy month, towards the end of the month of Ramadan, we all feel better. Whether it's physically, whether it's spiritually, we feel it naturally. And there's a reason behind that, is because the effect of fasting itself. And naturally, if you look at how we tend to behave in the month of Ramadan, we're active, we're very, very busy. Many of us, and I've seen this and I've experienced this myself, we tend to sleep less in the holy month. We sleep less, we eat less, yet we have more energy. Spiritually, we're awakened. Spiritually, physically, we have more energy. You'll find, for example, a person will wake up in the morning, he'll go to work. he will work without eating, drinking, without taking any supplements, and naturally he'll be able to work the long hours. He'll come home, he's going to rest for a little while, and then he will come to the center and he'll take part in the center. He'll clean up, he will volunteer, he'll prepare the iftar, he'll be at the service and the khadamat of the other mu'mineen and mu'minat, for example, in the community. He'll stay long hours after to make sure that everything closes perfectly, everything. He'll shut the gates of the mosque, for example. He'll go home, he'll stay up, recite the Holy Quran, watch a few programs on some of the Islamic channels, for example, listen to other lectures or lecturers online, have suhoor, and then he'll go to sleep after Salatul Fajr, for example. And then he'll sleep less hours before he wakes up for the following day. Naturally, we sleep less. And we see people around us sleep less, yet we tend to be more active. And that's a secret. That's something that needs to be more researched into. But from my very humble, less research that little research that I've engaged in, there is potentially an answer. And I see this not through because of what the Ahlul Bayt have said, not only what the Ahlul Bayt have said, but also through what the ulama themselves experience in their lives. And alhamdulillah, Allah has given me the tawfiq to actually witness this firsthand, where the one who engages in more ibadat in his life, naturally he's given more energy. I'll give you a very simple example, the example of Salat al-Layl. Salat al-Layl is everyone who wants to practice Salat al-Layl, they have a trade-off that they need to make. Either the person will say to him, either I wake up an hour earlier or half an hour earlier, before Fajr, engage in Salat al-Layl, and then perform Salat al-Fajr. Now, if I wake up an hour earlier or half an hour earlier, then that will have an impact in how in my productivity during the day and how I perform at work. If I perform less or if my performance drops, then that has an effect on my work, and my superiors will know about this, and so on and so forth. So there's a natural worry that this person goes through, and he collectively, calculately thinks about what he should do. Should he wake up an hour earlier or half an hour earlier? Or should he postpone his Salat al-Layl, for example, after Isha, for example? Just an example. So you find that naturally we tend to think about things, even the time that we wake up, because it has an effect on our productivity, or we think it has an effect on our productivity. So we tend to, for example, come up with a decision to say, okay, I won't wake up for Salat al-Layl. And many of us don't, unfortunately. May Allah give us the tawfiq for that. But then when you come to the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt, the Ahlul Bayt have made it very, very clear. One of the benefits of Salat al-Layl is that even though you are willing to sacrifice that amount of sleep, Allah will give you the energy throughout the day. Allah will step in actively and give you the energy that you fear losing if you wake up early for Salat al-Layl. So you find here that the person who engages in extra ibadat, engages in the worship of Allah, physical worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, naturally that energy is given to him by the Ahlul Bayt. That's something very interesting. Now when I look towards the scholars, for example, I've come across scholars who are very active. And I'm talking about active at a different level. They are muballigh, so they constantly travel from one city to another. They come back to Qom or Najaf and they are actively teaching every day in, day out for a few hours. And that means that they have to go home, they have to study, they have to read, they have to spend time with their families, they have to spend time with their children. They're active. They sleep 4 to 5 hours a day. 4 to 5 hours. Today science is telling us that we should sleep at least 8 hours. An average person should sleep at least 8 to 9 hours a night. And I see scholars who are very active, very active, very strong-minded. Physically they are healthy, and they tend to sleep 4 to 5 hours a night. And I think to myself, well, how is that possible? You look at the biography of Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, rahmatullah alayh. They say he used to sleep 4 to 5 hours a night. And at the same time, he was considered to be a foresighted individual with, basira, with a person who had, he was beyond his time in terms of his knowledge. How do you reconcile that? Perhaps one of the methods of reconciliation is that the one who engages in more ibadat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him the energy for the rest of the day, or for, throughout the day. And we see this in Ramadan. We sleep less, we eat less, we engage in more ibadat, and I'll share some of the narrations in the coming moments. And at the same time, the reciprocation or the effect of this, the consequence of this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give this person more energy. But you find that this time, this year, it's unique because we won't have that chance. We won't have the chance to be outside of our houses, in the center, for example, or with our friends, engaging in different ibadats. We will be effectively in our houses, and we will have to compensate doing all of the ibadats in our houses. And that's going to be very, very difficult for us to transition to, especially this year, given the current circumstances. And I think one of the ways of trying to ease that, one of the ways of trying to come in terms with that, to accept that, is to mentally prepare ourselves for it. With regards to the whole concept of fasting, when you examine the words of the fuqaha, coming from a fiqh perspective, fasting is an action which is not considered to be an amal, a fi'li action. It's considered to be a tariki action. Now let me explain what that means. When you look at all of the other ibadat in the religion of Islam, when you look at salah, salah is a combination of actions. First, I have to be pure. I have to be in the state of tahara. Then I have to go and I have to perform, for example, takbirat al-ihram, qira'ah, ruku, sujood, taslim. All of these are combinations of actions which effectively creates the whole picture of salah. When you look at hajj, hajj physically requires me to go somewhere. I need to go towards the holy lands and perform certain a'mals for it to be recognized as hajj. When you look at zakat, zakat I have to physically give. Khums I have to physically give. All of these are fi'li. All of these are actions that I have to perform. But when it comes to fasting, fasting is not something that I perform. It's something that I leave. It's something that I abandon. So when you look at the ruling of fasting, there are 10 things that I have to refrain from for it to be considered as fasting. So from internally, I have to have the niyyah, the intention of qurbatan ilallah. Then physically, I have to refrain from performing actions. Not that I have to perform actions, I have to refrain from performing actions. So the whole identity, the whole, for example, the spiritual nature of fasting is different from all of the other ibadat. And that's what's unique about it. And therefore, when you come towards some of the narrations looking into the benefits of fasting, the effects of fasting, it's mentioned by the Ahlul Bayt. They say by nature, because fasting is different, the rewards of it are different as well. For every good deed, there are at least 10 times reward that is given to the human being, or from 10 times to 700 times, depending on who you are and what your identity is as a human being. Now someone may ask the question, how is it possible for a person to receive either 10 times more reward or 700 times more reward? This is a separate discussion, but quickly, it depends on the level of ma'rifah that you have. The more understanding you have of the religion of Islam, that has a profound effect on the effects of the ibadat that you perform. There's a difference between an alim who worships Allah than a jahil who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a vast difference. A jahil, for example, may receive 10 times reward, whereas an alim may receive 200 times or 300 times or even 700 times according to this narration. But then he says, the Ahlul Bayt or the Ma'sum, he then says, but with regards to fasting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fasting, I am the reward of fasting. Meaning that the reward of fasting is only known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is not something that a normal human being or even a Ma'sum can explain. Allah says, I am the reward of fasting, meaning the reward is in my hands and I can give as much as I want. So naturally, because the whole spiritual essence of fasting is different from all the other ibadat, you find that the nature of fasting, the effects of fasting is different from all the other ibadat as well. And it's necessary that when we enter the month of fasting, we need to create a plan. That's very, very important. That's vital. You can't enter something without making a plan. And I think I gave an example last week with regards to the person who enters his examination. A person has to study. He has to study for him to pass his examinations. If he doesn't study, if he tries to wing his examinations, he's going to flop, he's going to fail. Likewise, if we enter the month of Ramadan without understanding how powerful it is, without understanding the spiritual essence it has in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're going to fail. We're not going to pass, we're not going to benefit or receive maximum benefit from this holy month. It necessitates that we create a plan before entering the holy month of Ramadan. And I'm not talking about, making physical plans, that I'm going to physically change myself in the month of Ramadan. No. Take time to think about your spiritual state as well. Take time to think about who you are as a person. In the month of Muharram, whenever we speak about Imam al-Husayn, the speakers always make it a point to explain and to remind ourselves, where would we stand if we were in Karbala at this moment in time? Would we stand with the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, or would we stand in the army of Imam Husayn alayhi salam? So it's the same principle that has to be reminded. If I am not a perfect person and there are changes that need to be made, let me sit down from now and try and create a plan so that this thing that I want to adapt in my life or adopt in my life is adopted by the end of the month of Ramadan. And of course, there's a condition to it, which we'll come to in a moment. When you turn towards the riwayat of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, when he speaks about the month of Ramadan, and this narration is mentioned in the sermon of the last Friday of Sha'ban, when he speaks about the month of Ramadan, he says, look, the month of Ramadan, the time within it is different from all the time that is found outside of the month of Ramadan. It is the best of months. The weeks are the best of weeks, the days are the best of days, and the hours are the best of hours. Which means that we need to try and maximize our ibadat in this month in whatever way possible. Someone asked a question last week which it behooves me to repeat the question, and not only that, but repeat the answer as well. What makes the month of Ramadan special? What's special about the month of Ramadan? Again, come back to the hadith of Rasulullah. He says the time within it is not like the time outside of it. Why is that? It is because of Laylatul Qadr. The peak of the month of Ramadan is Laylatul Qadr. خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَلْفِ الشَّهْرِ. It's greater than a lifetime. Greater than 1,000 months. It doesn't say it's equal to 1,000 months. It's خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَلْفِ الشَّهْرِ. Potentially the power of it, the spiritual accumulation that is there within the night of Qadr cannot be found outside in any other nights. The whole point of Ramadan is a build-up towards the night of Qadr. And you find that according to the narrations and the Holy Quran, because the Quran was revealed in Laylatul Qadr, it had an effect in that month. That entire month was made holy, it was sanctified because of that one night, which then makes it gives it that glory compared to all the other months. So it behooves us to remind ourselves how important the month of Ramadan is, to create a plan before we enter the month of Ramadan, so that when we leave the month of Ramadan, we have actively changed ourselves or something within our lives. When a person, for example, realizes that he needs to change the way he eats, the way he drinks, he needs to go on a diet. Going on a diet or starting a diet is not effective unless you make a plan. Anything in life, we need to make a plan so that whenever we carry out a project, whenever we start a business, it is successful. And we do what is the best in our ability. Likewise, spiritually, when you enter the month of Ramadan, try and plan for it rather than entering it without a plan. Because before you know it, you realize that the Laylatul Qadr is just around the corner. We enter Laylatul Qadr, we realize the time that we've lost, the time that we have not taken advantage of. And by the time you know it, before you know it, we're leaving the month of Ramadan and it's the day of Eid. And that regret then falls. The regret then emanates in our hearts. The time that we wasted. We could have done so much, but we weren't able to do so because we weren't mindful of it, because we did not make a plan for it. So now the second area of my discussion is, what areas should I focus on? Say that we're a week away from the month of Ramadan. What actions should I focus on from now? but more specifically during the month of Ramadan. The best advice is to refer to the hadith of Rasulullah when he speaks about the month of Ramadan, the sermon that he delivers in the end of the month of Sha'ban. And within the sermon, he categorizes and he lists all of the different actions that we can perform during the month of Ramadan. And some of these are very, very interesting. So when he describes the month of Ramadan, he's saying, or he explains to us, that it is a month within which breathing is seen as ibadat, sleeping is seen as ibadat, and all of the good deeds are accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now think about that for a moment. As a human being, I have two types of choices. I have choices, or I have two types of actions. There are actions which are based on my choice, my irada, my will. I think about it and I perform it voluntarily. But then there are actions which are involuntary. It's not in my control, but I perform them. For example, breathing. I don't think about breathing. It's an automatic function of my body. The way I digest food, for example. Sleeping is essential. I don't think about sleeping. I have to sleep. If I force myself to stay awake, how long can I stay awake? According to science, for example, they say that a person who actively stays awake for more than 48 hours, he has symptoms of a person who is majnoon. He goes mad. He sees things that he cannot see or that don't exist, and he hears things that don't exist. A person physically goes mad if he actively stays awake. So sleeping is a natural function and it overpowers me. If I was to put my head down, for example, when I'm extremely tired, sleep overpowers me, it overwhelms me. So sleep is not an active function. When you look at, for example, this particular wording of the Holy Prophet, he is explaining to me that my actions that I don't have control over, that I don't think about, that I don't have power over, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards me for it. And Allah takes it as ibadat from me. So my breathing, which I don't think about, Allah rewards me for it because of the blessed month, because of the nature of the blessed month. And then the good deeds. We are Muslims and we are commanded by Rabbul Alameen to perform certain actions, salah, som, zakat, hajj, and so on and so forth. When we perform these are our responsibilities. We are meant to perform these actions. Whether they are accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not, that's a different matter altogether. I can perform salah. Whether that salah ascends towards the heavens, that's a different issue altogether. But here in the holy month, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam explains that your deeds are accepted. That's the first thing. Then he begins to outline some of the actions that we should at least honor within this month. He says, for example, give sadaqah. Make sure that those who are in need receive some of your blessings. Wealth is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me share that blessing with others around me. Be honorable to the old. Respect the elderly within the community. Give them a phone call once in a while. Be kind to the young ones. You know, sometimes the young ones in our community, we don't pay heed towards them. We don't think about them. You'll have people who walk into the center, they don't even look towards the children. By us saying Salamun Alaikum has a phenomenal effect on our children. Let's try and spend some time with our children. Play with them, play games with them, for example. It's a good thing to do during the month of Ramadan, to actively create a relationship with our blood relatives, Salat al-Rahim. Again, Rasulullah outlines this. And then he goes on to explain how we should try and control our tongues. In one of the seminars that we've had recently, I spoke about the importance of controlling our tongue. The effect of our tongues is far greater and far more devastating than the effects of our eyes, our ears, our hands, and our limbs, according to the ulama. Close your eyes. This is going into a whole new dimension of fasting. Close your eyes. Do not see things that you are not meant to. Close your ears. Do not listen to things that you are not meant to. I remember in my days in college, people used to say, oh, you know what, it's Ramadan, I shouldn't be listening to music, or I'm not listening to music. People use Ramadan as an excuse to try and not do things that they're not supposed to. But that's supposed to be a time where you and I create a habit to leave the negative to live the sinful actions and to try and phase them out of our lives. Not that During the month of Ramadan, we stop sinning, and then as soon as Eid comes by, then we resume what we paused during the month of Ramadan. And then he says, be compassionate to the orphans. Try and donate as much as you can towards the orphans. There are many, alhamdulillah, many charities that allow and provide services to pay online. So that shouldn't be a problem at all. Prostration, sujood, lengthening of the sujood. My God, the effects of prostration, it kills arrogance. Arrogance is something that stagnates our spiritual growth. One of the effects of killing our arrogance is prostration and the lengthening of one's prostration. And then towards the end of the hadith of the Holy Prophet, or the sermon of the Holy Prophet, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam asks a question. And it's a phenomenal question. Remember, this is a question coming from the most knowledgeable person in existence, second to Rasulullah. So this is not a normal question now. This is a very, very high, weighty question. And he says to Rasulullah in front of all the companions. And by the way, it's not that the Imam didn't know. The Imam knows, but the Imam is trying to explain to the people how important, number one, his question is, and number two, how important the answer of the Holy Prophet is. So he says, Ya Rasulullah, ma afdal al-a'mal fi shahr Ramadan. What is the best amal that a person can perform in the month of Ramadan? Because on the one hand, you have a list of actions that the Holy Prophet has outlined for us to perform. But then the Imam says, hold on a second. What is the best amal that I can perform in this particular month? Upon which the Holy Prophet replies, he says, Al-wara anil maharimillah, to have or be in the state of wara from everything that Allah has made haram. 2 points to mention here. What is wara? Wara, according to my limited research, is a state higher than taqwa. When you ask what is taqwa, taqwa is when a person stays away from haram and adheres to that which is wajib. Simple formula. Neglect the haram, do the wajib. That's it. Al-wara is a step higher. It's when you go on beyond that. You try and expand the circle of deeds. You take on or you do as much as mustahabbat, things which are mustahab, and you refrain from that which is makruh. Taqwa, reaching the stage of taqwa is hard as it is. To neglect and to phase out all of the haram in our lives and to perform all of the wajibat is hard as it is. But al-wara anil maharimillah is even harder. But with hardship, when you push yourself to do things which are beyond you, you become, number one, used to it over time, but then you become a recipient of Allah's mercy and Allah's infinite blessings. That's the first point. The second point is, according to this narration, as explained by the scholars, they explain that the best act during the month of Ramadan is to abstain from sins. You are not required to perform all of the du'as and all of the salah that is prescribed within Mafatih al-Janan, for example, that have been advised from the Ahl al-Bayt. There is only so much that we can do. And of course, that's not me saying that I'm not encouraging you to do all of these different ibadat. No, I encourage myself first and foremost and everyone else to try and do as many ibadat as possible. But the best of all of the ibadat is to try and abstain from sinning. To refrain from sinning is an ibadah in itself. Ibadah is not limited to what I do on the musalla, for example. Just me staying away from the environment of sinning or staying away from sinning itself, that is a form of ibadah. And therefore, when you refer to Risalat al-Huquq of Imam Zain al-Abidin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, and when he speaks about the rights of fasting, he says, إِنَّهُ حِجَابٌ ضَرَبَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى لِسَانِكَ وَسَمْعِكَ وَبَصَرِكَ وَفَرْجِكَ وَبَطْنِكَ. This is the next state of fasting, the next level of fasting. The first level of fasting is I refrain from everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made haram on me, eating, drinking, and all of the other actions that you'll find in the Risalat al-Amaliyah. But the next state of fasting is when I fast my eyes are fasting, my ears are fasting, my stomach is fasting, my tongue is fasting. It means that when I listen to music in the state of fasting, does this break my fast? No, fiqhi wise, according to our hakam, it doesn't break your fast. but I'm not fasting according to the fasting of the ears. It says no. When you fast, it's not just refraining from the 10 things that Allah has made haram on you. It's to also try and allow all of the limbs of your body to fast as well. And this is phenomenal. This is the effect of that it has a profound effect on the human being. Now it all comes under one condition, and it's all under the condition of one thing. The fasting of a believer is different to a fasting of a non-believer, or a fasting of a person who has not submitted to the message of Islam. Why is that? Ramadan is a month of change. It is a month in which we can culture, we can nurture ourselves, we can create a change within ourselves. But that is dependent on our hearts and our internal, how we are from within. You take the example of land. You have two types of land. You have the land which is fertile, but you have land which is barren. When rain showers, or when rain falls on these two types of lands, the land which is fertile will have growth, but the land which is barren will not have growth. The rain is one and the same. The mercy of Allah is one and the same. But it depends on the type of heart this mercy comes towards or falls upon. If my heart is fertile and I submit towards the message of Islam, and I submit towards, for example, the ahkam and the words and the advices and the laws that have been determined by the Ahlul Bayt, then you'll find that what showers or what comes towards my heart from the blessings of Allah will have an effect on me. But if my heart is barren, if my heart does not accept, and I am very stubborn and I want to challenge, for example, many of the laws, then you find, for example, the mercy that falls upon me by Allah will not have an effect on me, will not nurture any change within me. And this is often a discussion amongst the ulama with regards to fasting of a believer and a non-believer. And it's a discussion amongst them in which they say that many of the ahkam that we have, are they just for the Muslims or are they for non-Muslims as well? And so you had that for many, many centuries. Muslim scholars, even today, contemporary scholars believe that fasting or many of the ahkam that we have are not just for the Muslims but also for the non-Muslims. And what's interesting is that, social media, you'll find that non-Muslims will try and feel what Muslims feel during the month of Ramadan. So they'll try to fast for a day or for a week instead of an entire month. Then people ask the question, well, if they're fasting, are they rewarded for it? No, that's not for me to answer. That's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But will that fasting have an effect on them? Well, if you're coming from this perspective, where they don't accept the message of Islam, or they don't accept the wilayah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Ahlul Bayt, but they fast physically, they abstain from food and drink, the mercy that comes towards them, will that have an effect on them? Based on this principle, based on this understanding, it will have very little effect on them compared to the mu'min who receives the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The effect of it for the mu'min is far more greater than the effect on a non-mu'min or a non-Muslim. That's the third area of my discussion. The fourth area of my discussion, and very importantly, within the sermon of the Holy Prophet of Islam, he then goes on to say the importance of the Holy Quran, the power of the Holy Quran. Reciting a verse of the Quran within the month of Ramadan is far greater than, or is equivalent to, reciting the entire Quran outside of the month of Ramadan. One verse is equivalent to the entire Quran, which means that we need to try and bank on this as much as possible. If you can't read the Quran, you get tired, try and listen to it. With the use of technology, we can always try and find alternatives. Try and listen to the Quran as much as possible. When you look at the Holy Quran, the Quran itself declares this in many verses. هذا قرآن هذا بيان للناس هدى وموعظة للمتقين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains through the verses of the Holy Quran that the Quran is a maw'idah. Maw'idah meaning it is a spiritual counsel for the human being. It interacts with the nafs, it interacts with the ruh. That's why you find, for example, many non-Muslims, when they listen to the verses of the Holy Quran, they feel different. They feel more comfortable. They feel at peace. There is sukunat. Maybe not at a very high level, but they feel, even if it's very minimum, they feel a sense of sukunat, because this is the power of the Holy Quran. It had an effect on the Quraysh of Mecca. It had on the effects of the jinns, for example, when you refer to Surah Al-Jinn, verse number 1, that a group of jinn, when they heard the verses of the Holy Quran, they were shocked because of the power it had. It has a power on the human being. The reason why is because the Quran interacts with the ruh of the human being. It is a maw'idha. هَذَا بَيَانٌ لِلنَّاسِ هُدًى وَمَوْعِظَةٌ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So, of course, and it's very important to mention this, making little changes has an effect in the long term. It has a profound effect in the long run. Someone may say, well, it's the month of Ramadan, let me recite Quran. So he will recite 20 pages, an entire juz, an entire sipara, for example. He does this the second day, does this the third day, does this the fourth day. After that, he will find it very hard to continue. He will find it very, very hard to continue, because when you start from something which is large, something which you're not accustomed to, it becomes very easy for you to abandon it very shortly. Try and start small. Do as much as possible. Half a page, 2 pages, whatever it is. And try and increase that when you become habituated in reading half a page or 2 pages. Always try and increase it when you've become habituated in doing the little that you've started off with. And finally, before ending, always, this is one of the tactics that, it makes sense to me, and something that I not only do with regards to the areas and affairs in Islam, but even outside, for example, of Islam, in my other parts of life. Try and recite, if you want, of course, it may be very early for this, try and recite the dua of the wida of Ramadan, the farewell of Ramadan. Always try and remind yourself of the duas towards the end of the month of Ramadan, rather than, for example, reading the du'as that are prescribed. Now, of course, it's mustahab to read the du'as prescribed for every day, but try and make it a point to read any passage. It doesn't have to be the entire du'a, just parts of the du'a of the farewell that has been prescribed by Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. You see, naturally, when I go buy a book, a textbook, not a novel, a textbook, I usually go through the contents page. Right? I try and see what areas the book is talking about. Sometimes when I come across a paper and it's important for me to understand what the author is talking about, and if the paper is very long, what I do is I read the conclusion. I try and find out what conclusions did this author come towards. What was his findings, what was his results, what was his conclusions. And that summarizes the entire paper. When I go towards the dua of wida prescribed by Imam Sajjad alayhi salam in Sahifa Sajjadiyah, I see what he's talking about. I can examine what exactly he's talking about. When I see what he's talking about, then I can say to myself, okay, this is what I need to focus on in the month of Ramadan. So that when I end up reading this dua in the final nights of Ramadan, then I can say to myself, you know what, I tried my best to try and adopt myself with these actions. Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam talks about many actions like shukr. Like, for example, many actions like dua. So I can say to myself, okay, this was the month when I did interact in shukr, when I did perform dua. He talks about, for example, Allah's qualities of being merciful. Was I merciful in my life? Was I merciful to my children? Was I merciful to the people in the community? Right? Imam Zain al-Abidin beautifully summarizes many of the actions, many of the qualities of a mu'min at the end of the month of Ramadan. He talks about istighfar. Did I focus on istighfar as much as I should have, for example? These are just examples. When you read the conclusion of anything, it allows you to understand what you should focus on, what you should look after, what you should look out on. So maybe you could, for example, focus on a line or two in this particular phenomenal dua that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam prescribes at the end of the month of Ramadan. And these are different tactics, of course, shared by the ulama that we can focus on during this holy month, inshaAllah. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. So we had a few questions, actually. I'll answer one of them. If a non-Muslim fasted, would it be accepted? Well, that's the issue, right? One of the criteria of fasting is that there has to be a niyyah, qurbatan ila Allah. If a non-Muslim doesn't believe in Allah or doesn't believe in the authority of Allah and the Sharia of Islam, Would it be accepted? Well, the answer is no, it's not accepted. They benefit from the physical benefits of fasting, which is obviously it strengthens the body and has all of these meticulous physical effects on the human body. That's there. But spiritually there's no belief. You refer to the Holy Quran. We had this question last night as well. In the Holy Quran, this position of the non-Muslim. It comes down to two main areas. For a person to reach and reach the higher echelons of Jannah, it comes down to two things. Number one, Iman and Amal. Amal without Iman has no benefit spiritually, and Iman without Amal has no benefit spiritually. It's a combination of two. أحسنتم. وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد.